At this time, I would now like to invite our next speaker up, Trent Fox, who is a member of the Wesley First Nation and the Stoney Nakoda Nation. Trent will expand on his views and how Indigenous people need to be part of the conversation and the solution when it comes to climate change. Trent is an author, a columnist, and interestingly, is researching the history of the Stoney Nakoda and the development of the Lethka, I hope I did that justice, Trent, dialect of the Nakoda language. Please help me welcome Trent to the stage.
I'm off. Can you hear me? Okay. Isnis dagun sawa de magitumde. Thank you, my relations, for inviting me to this event. I'm a last-minute replacement for a young man named Daryl Kootenai who was to present, and his presentation was titled All My Relations. And I thought, what an appropriate title. Sorry.
Would it be easier with this?
My ears are, there we go. So what an appropriate title, All My Relations. Daguintawa. The Indigenous worldview is that we are one as one people, be it Caucasian, Asian, Indigenous, and we are also one with nature. So we view the earth as a living being and all of creation as living entities. Again, Isnis Dagun Sawa. So I need my reading glasses. The challenge is this. Yeah. Okay. So, my talk is going to be about one of our great leaders, but I wanted to mention some quotes that I read about. Like Stephen Lay said, I'm not qualified to speak on climate because it's not my area of research, but the United Nations on climate change said in August of 2021 that living in harmony with nature, Indigenous peoples safeguard 80% of the world's biodiversity and hold many of the solutions to the climate crisis, despite constituting less than 5% of the global population. Indigenous people, as I think Diane mentioned, must be part of the solution to climate change. This is because they have the traditional knowledge of their ancestors. The important value of that knowledge simply cannot and must not be understated. An example is how the Inuit in the Arctic identified the moving of the Earth's North and South Pole, which was later verified by science. And so they identified that change through their oral histories, their knowledge, and the wisdom they had about the climate. cannot see this thing. Where is this thing?
Hey, Ed, you've gone backwards.
Yeah, where's me? Oh, there we go. Thank you. No, right here.
Okay, just touch it.
Okay, thank you. The Joint Action for Climate Change, also in 2021, said First Nations people in North America are not only at the forefront of the impacts of climate change, but also possess knowledge and unique insights into addressing and adapting to climate change. First Nations leaders, organizations, and communities have reinforced the need for Canada to take an ambitious and holistic approach to reducing carbon pollution, adapting to the impacts of climate change, and improving the ways in which the natural environment is respected. For the Government of Canada, supporting self-determined climate action is critical for all First Nations. And this is something environmentalist David Suzuki recently said publicly, that people do need to turn to Indigenous knowledge systems to learn more about managing our mother, the earth. So now I'm going to talk about Ta'otha. Ta'otha, it was one of our leaders of what is now the Wesley First Nation. His name literally translates to moose killer, but really refers to his prowess as a hunter. He was recognized as a great hunter, as a young man, a hunter among hunters. He was also a diplomat and defender of the Stoney people, and he led a movement to return his people to ancestral lands in Kidoney-Hetinda, the Kootenay Plains. So, Ta'otha was born in 1841 in Nordegg, what is now Nordegg, which is the traditional land of the Ithka Nakota. He was the grandson of Walks Against the Wind and a member of Kitchapot's band of Nakota people. Ta'otha was known as a great hunter, as I mentioned, and was part of Kitchapot's clan. Kitchapot, which translates to big stone in the Nehiyaw, the Cree language, and the Anishinaabe language. His reflects the name of what the Anishinaabe called the Nakota, Asinapot, which was later translated by the French to Assiniboine. So the Assiniboine and the Nakota and the Stoney are one people. Neither word is found in our vocabulary. We are the Ithka, speakers of a clear language. Kitchapot was given the name Jacob Goodstoney when he signed Treaty 7 on behalf of his people, and the band was named Jacob's Band, and later the Goodstoney Band. The signing of Treaty 7 resulted in dramatic changes. The Ithka understood the treaty to mean they would share resources with settlers. The reality, as you know, would be different. Kitchapot and his people have lived alongside the Rocky Mountains long before contact and had adapted to the environment. They no longer relied on the bison. They hunted moose, elk, deer, and other game found in the mountains, but hunted in a way that they did not deplete the game that was available. For some time, the Ithka continued their way of life. They traveled between this area and the Kootenai Plains, relying on indigenous knowledge. However, Western perspectives would change our environment. For example, the Real Rebellion of 1885 resulted in our people being confined to the Stoney Reservation. Prior to that, our people, being the westernmost of the Sioux, Nakota, were allowed to hunt in what is now Banff National Park, travel back and forth between Kootenai Plains and Morley. But those rebellions and unrest in the U.S. by the Nez Perce made it so that our people, indigenous people in Canada, were confined to reserves. In 1887, so my ancestors' reliance on hunting and gathering was then restricted. They could no longer rely on indigenous knowledge. And in 1887, this restriction was further increased when the Rocky Mountain National Park, what is now Banff National Park, was established. The intent, according to the late Chief John Snow, was to confine our people to the reserve and transition to a life of agriculture. However, the land in Morley was not suitable for agriculture due to its rocky terrain. The Ithka, who had remained independent, now relied on rations, snaring small animals, and harvesting what berries they could find within the confines of the reserve. Excuse me. My people were accused of slaughtering a horse to eat, which oral history contests as not being true. They relied on horses. We relied on horses. So around this time, Ta'otha became frustrated with the Indian agents, as well as Ketchupwat, Jacob Goodstoney. His resistance increased, as our people began to suffer. He resisted confinement and had continued to travel back and forth between Minisni, Morley, and Kidunehetinda, Kootenai Plains. In 1894, Ta'otha declared, because the environment had been his environment had been impacted, he declared that my people, my children are hungry, they cry in the night. My young men have empty stomachs, and there is no meat in my camp. So I and mine go back to the Kootenai Plains. There we shall have meat, and the children shall grow fat and happy. Grass grows there for our horses, and they will grow strong. We valued horses, and so he included horses in his statement. So Ta'otha then led his clan and his followers to the Kootenai Plains on horseback, traveling through the Rockies. It took them 5 nights and 6 days to reach what was the ancestral lands of Ketchepwat and his people. Ta'otha was not the leader. His chieftaincy came in 1904 and was chief until his death in 1935. He led well into his 90s, and as the new leader, Jacob's band became the Wesley Band, for he was named Peter Wesley. Ta'otha petitioned the government to honor the treaty and officially grant his people land at the beautiful Kootenai Plains. Initially, 23,000 acres was set aside for the Wesley Band. However, the provincial government established the Rocky Mountain Forest Reserve, and the deal was nullified. In 1914, he was instrumental in acquiring 12,700 acres at what is now the Rabbit Lake Reserve, which is between here and Morley. And sadly, a reserve was established near the Kootenai Plains in 1948, 13 years after his passing. But it was his visionary work that led to this establishment of what is now called the Bighorn Reserve. And then in 1994, Chief Ernest Wesley, a descendant of Ta'otha, held a memorial ride from Mountaineer Lodge, what we call Inyarhetinda, mountain plain, what the non-native, non-Stonies call Yahatinda. And so from there they traveled to Kootenai Plains to remember his significant contribution to the Wesley people and the Ethka Nakota people. Western encroachment has affected our environment. It affected our way of life. Ta'otha was a formidable leader who resisted capitalism and tried to lead his people back to a cultural way of life. No longer able to hunt or harvest berries, roots, and medicines, the Ethka were devastated by changes to their environment. Yet, Ta'otha led with courage and conviction. In 1894, he saved his people from starvation. As chief, he lobbied vigorously to save what remained. Today, he is remembered as a great leader by the Ethka, who have maintained their culture and language. And we find now, as our language starts to decline amidst globalization, that at the Bighorn community, the language is very vibrant. We have little kids in kindergarten still speaking Ethka. So it's Shnish to Ta'otha. So for this, I referenced These Mountains Are Our Sacred Places, a book written by the late Chief John Snow, as well as the Dictionary of Canadian Biography by Ian Geddy, who was a historian who worked for our community. And so I will leave you with a poem that I wrote about 5 years ago for a linguistic class I was taking, and it's called Mankochene, this land. Mankochene, the Hasik Sats, Ahoma Pabisins, Ayagats, the horse Ningahna, Kohandu Ho Okada Yawan, Wahiobni na. Nangu Mankochene spa kogewan. Mankochene zehasi nats. Utantahuna or Nakohuna Minis of Den one. Ahoim Habik de Ingik Tabisins. What did Jane Nangusik Tabine Tom Nartinko of Den Yabits Mankotsene Mangida Asins Yagats. Anoy Tambik de Tadin. In my sphere, Nedahan is the big Titani. In my sphere, my Kotsene or Simandam, Yagats, Segijigam. I'll just translate that quickly. My Kotsene, Zeha Siksats. This land, it is now tired. Ahoma Pabisins, Yagats. It is saying, you no longer respect me. The horse tinga ahina, it becomes very cold. Kohandu hookada yawan, it's also becoming very hot. Wahiomni huna, tornadoes are happening. Nangu makotsene, spark yawan, floods are taking place. Makotsene, zehashi nuts, the land, she is now angry. Utantahuna, it shakes. Or nahuna, there are forest fires. Minis of the one, the water levels are depleting. Ahoim habik dike in Githabishins, we have forgot to respect Mother Earth. Wadejane, the animals. Nangu tiktabinne, the birds. Tomnartinko, the bees. Optenyabits are reducing in numbers. Mankotsende, mangidasins, eagats. The earth is saying she is not feeling well. Are we going to listen in Mysia or not? Are we going to learn from this? In Mysia, Mankotsene, Osimanam, Agats. The earth is now saying, take pity on me. Tigijigam, pray for her. It's this.
Thank you, Trent. Questions for Trent? Yes, Michael. Can you go to a mic, please? Or bring a mic to Michael. Bring a mic to Michael.
My name is Mike. I'm not from Canmore, though. I just wanted to reflect back what I'm hearing you say. And I'd like you to tell me if I'm getting it or if I'm missing it, because there's a message here. The message I'm hearing is that your people were one with the land. They were so connected to the land that life, their own life and the life of the land were inseparable. And then with the coming of the Europeans and the treaties and all the things that happened, that connection was broken, not because your people chose it, but because it happened. And especially with Banff National Park and access to the Kootenay Plains, that was where you gathered your food and where you could live. And now the people were starving. And so then your leader, the story of, say his name please for me. Taota's message to me is we must reestablish that connection to the land or we're going to die. It's that critical. Yeah. So he took his people and he went to another place where they could actually have that connection to the land. And so what I take from your story is now the whole earth is in that same situation. And we must urgently reestablish that connection to the land or we're going to die.
Yeah, very much so. It's our connection to the land. We see everything as a living object. And so when we harvest trees, we offer tobacco. When we harvest animals, we do so economically and make an offering to their spirits. And we even see rocks as living beings and spiritual beings as well. So we do need to reconnect with our Mother Earth and learn to respect her and what she is saying to us around the world. Thank you.
Thanks, Trent.
Hello,
Meg?
thank you. Thank you so much, Meg, from Shelter Box Canada. I want to thank you so much for delivering this important talk today and just teaching us about really important leaders within your community. I was wondering if you could share with us, in addition to yourself and your colleague that you're replacing today, what are some names of Indigenous leaders today that we should be looking at for guidance and for knowledge?
Indigenous leaders today? Like in the present?
Yes, like some people that influence your work and that we could look at, yeah.
Well, there's many. When you can, I forgot her name, but Assembly of First Nations Chief Rose, I forgot her name, but she champions Indigenous knowledge and taking care of Mother Earth. There's also a First Nations chief out in Osoyoos, First Nation in BC, who is very, Chief Clarence Louis, who has really lifted up his community. And then within our own community, we have Chief Darcy Dixon, who is doing great work along with his Stony CEO, Rob Choclos. Together, they're working on economic development that focuses on sustaining the environment. So, Roseanne Archibald, AFN Chief, yes. And so in Morley, Chief Darcy Dixon is the foremost leader in terms of economic development, and he's established solar energy as one of the resources that we are starting to use in our community, and his land management policies have been very exceptional. So people like that are still working among many First Nations people.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
No other questions? Well, thank you, Trent, for sharing your timely and important. I'm sorry.
Hambawastich, Yishnish, thank you so much for sharing with us today and teaching us. My question is, how can Rotary clubs work better with Indigenous peoples on preventing the harm to Mother Earth?
Rotary clubs, excuse me. So my understanding is,
Just pull the mic down to you.
The Rotary clubs, my understanding is that they're clubs of successful people. So I think financial contributions to established organizations are something that can be done to support land management. They can also be teaming up with local First Nations to learn more about Indigenous knowledge systems in the area. There is not one form of Indigenous knowledge, there's various forms. And so teaming up with their local Indigenous people to learn about how they manage the land historically and in the contemporary sense. So really just partnerships and would be willing to learn. Yeah. Thank you. It's me.
Thank you to Trent for that. Certainly timely, and how the role of the Indigenous people can help with fighting climate change and our relationship with Mother Earth. The shelter box donation on behalf of Trent was sponsored by the Rotary Club of Chestermere.